Whatever you do, don't leave the basement. I was sitting on the couch in the basement, scrolling mindlessly through the endless library of content on Netflix, when the text came. It had been sent from an unknown number, and it read, "Whatever you do, don't leave the basement. Lock the door. Turn off the lights. You are in grave danger. Do not leave the basement." At first, I thought it was a prank text. Some punk texting numbers at random, hoping to scare someone. But at the same time, it was a little strange how they knew I was in my basement. After all, someone who was texting this to random numbers wouldn't be able to tell if the person they were pranking even had a basement. I inadvertently shot a quick glance at the small basement window. Nothing. Not a soul in sight. I decided to ignore the messages, figuring whoever it was had simply gotten lucky and had texted someone who just happened to be in their basement. However, less than a minute later, I got another text. "It is urgent that you heed this warning. Close and lock the door. Turn off all lights and silence all electronics. And whatever you do, don't leave your basement." I swallowed. Did they know I hadn't shut my door? That I hadn't turned off my lights? I was beginning to feel worried, but a quick glance at the window proved that no one was watching me. Or, at least, that no one was there now. I stood up, turned off the big screen and stretched. I decided to get a little sleep in before I had to go in for work that night. As I walked up the stairs, however, the text messages started. My phone began vibrating non-stop, receiving text after text after text. As I reached the top step, I pulled out my phone to see who they were from. The texts had all come from that same unknown number, saying things like, "Do not leave your basement. It is imperative that you stop moving right now and turn off all lights. Your life is in danger. Do not move. Please, this is for your own good. Do not leave the basement." How the hell did they know I was moving? The basement doorway loomed in front of me, showing the dark expanse of my kitchen. I hadn't realised that the sky had become overcast. I cautiously took a step into the kitchen. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. Whoever was texting had to be playing some sort of prank, though I wasn't finding it very funny. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot as I stepped out into the kitchen. Suddenly, a flash of lightning lit up the grey sky, and almost immediately, the rumble of thunder followed. I shivered, but continued to walk. Then, I heard a loud creak. However, this time, it didn't come from under my foot. In fact, it didn't come from a floorboard at all. This creak came from my door. The sound was the unmistakable noise of the front door opening slowly, as if whoever was opening it was attempting to do it quietly. As soon as the door opened, I got another text. I didn't bother to get out my phone, just leapt down into my basement and closed the door. I locked it, then strung the chain, and even carried a heavy chair up to barricade the door. But I still didn't feel safe. I carefully crept down the stairs and sat down on an old chair, pulling my phone out of my pocket to read the last few texts. The first one read, "For God's sake, please don't leave." The most recent one read, "Now you have been chosen. Do not trust anyone and don't leave the basement." I've been chosen? The hell does that mean? Finally, I did what I should have done in the first place. I texted the unknown number back. "Listen, I don't know what's going on, and I'm sure that I don't want to find out. Please just leave me the hell alone. I don't want to be a part of any of this." They didn't respond. Suddenly, I heard a sound coming from behind the basement door. A creak. The sound of pressure being placed upon a floorboard. Then, I heard the sound of the doorknob being jiggled. I froze. It jiggled again. And again. Every small noise coming from behind the locked door of the basement filled me with terror, paralyzing me with horror. I looked around the small basement for anything that could remotely be considered a weapon. The room was, unfortunately, mostly empty, with the closest thing to a self-defense tool being the remote for the TV. I grabbed it and crouched down in the corner of the room. My breathing felt too loud. My head felt like it was spinning. The cold basement seemed to close in around me. I started imagining sounds. At least, I thought I was imagining them. I began hearing footsteps, voices, whispers. They echoed around me. I heard yells coming from outside my house, then screams, then silence. After what felt like an hour, the sound stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was all in my head after all. And then I heard a knock at the basement window. As previously mentioned, the basement window is small. In fact, I could barely see out of it. However, I was able to catch a glimpse of something outside, darting past it. I mustered up every last drop of courage in me and weakly yelled, "Who's there?" A few moments of silence followed, and then a voice replied,
"Just a traveller, seeking shelter from the storm."
The voice sounded male and somewhat strained, like he was speaking through gritted teeth. Who the hell would be out there in the middle of the rain? I live in a rural area in the middle of nowhere. I don't have any neighbours, and the nearest grocery store is half an hour's drive away. Something was wrong. "I'm sorry, I can't let you in."
"Why not?"
the voice replied, this time with a hint of anger in it. I didn't reply. The texts and the sounds in my house seemed a little too real to be a part of some elaborate prank. Instead, I shifted a little to my right, just out of view from the window for anyone looking inside the house from the yard. Thank God I did that, because a few seconds after I did, something leaned over and peered into the dark basement. It's impossible to describe the thing in the window, simply because I could hardly see it. The dust and dirt combined with the size of the window made it difficult to make out what was staring at me. All that I could see were two solid red eyes looking around inside my basement. Two small black pupils glanced around, attempting to find me. I placed my head between my knees and tried to steady my breathing. It's been 48 hours since then. I've been living off of the potato chips and energy drinks down in my basement. I'm running out, and I know soon I'll have to leave to get more food. I've spent the last couple of days sitting in the dark, listening to the sounds of footsteps and knocking on my doors. It's maddening, but there's nothing I can do. I've tried calling the cops, and I've tried calling the place I work at. I have a signal, but for some reason it never works. No one ever picks up. I'm terrified and I don't know what to do. If anyone out there is reading this, please, please, if you receive an odd text from an unknown number, listen to what it says.
My name is Mark Harrison, and my uncle went missing 3 days ago. His workplace called us, and they told us that he hadn't come in that night for his shift. No one has heard anything from him for the past few days, and since he lives so far away, we haven't gotten the chance to go looking for him yet. Supposedly, his workplace had called the police, but the officers apparently didn't come back after being sent out. The police force in that area is rather small and, to be honest, pretty pathetic. So they practically gave up and told us to just deal with it. I supposed that he had simply taken a few days off. Anyway, I turned to No Sleep, where I always go when I'm bored, and I discovered a post titled, "Whatever you do, don't leave the basement." I clicked on it, and I read it all the way through. That was when I noticed some striking similarities to my Uncle Ted. The small basement window, the layout of the basement and kitchen, even his stubborn personality was on point. Knowing from the little time I'd spent with him that he was an avid Reddit user, I connected the dots and realised what was going on. I immediately hopped in my car, turned the ignition, and took off down the road, ready for the 2-hour-long drive. I know there was only a small chance that the story was true, and that my uncle truly was locked in his basement. But I was worried about him, and I wanted to make sure he was safe. And besides, what did I have to lose? After the long and nerve-wracking trip, I finally pulled into my Uncle Ted's dirt driveway. Already there was a tension in the air, as if my very existence was a ticking time bomb. And somehow, I knew that I wasn't alone. I swung open the car door and hopped out, closing it behind me. The sound of the car door slamming shut echoed through the empty autumn air. I felt uneasy and ready to just get this over with. I slowly walked up the driveway, cautiously looking over my shoulder every few seconds. Clouds had begun to fill the sky, and rain seemed imminent. As I reached the porch, the familiar rumble of thunder sounded around me. I speedily pulled the key out of my pocket and started to unlock the door. As I twisted the key around in the lock, I peered inside the house, through the windows on either side of the door. I could have sworn that I saw a figure dart into the shadows. It was incredibly dark in the house, but I definitely saw something move. I swallowed hard, remembering the Reddit post, but I decided to keep going. The door swung open with a loud creak, and I stepped inside. As I did so, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Hesitantly, I checked it and saw that an unknown number was texting me. I froze. As I checked the text, my heart dropped. It read, "Have you learned nothing from your uncle? Get as far away from that god-forsaken house as you can while you're still able to. Very funny, Uncle Ted, I said, to the seemingly empty house. Is this some elaborate joke? If so, then you got me. No answer. Just silence. Uncle Ted, I cried out. You can come out now. My phone buzzed again. This time, with a text that read just one word. Run. What the hell? Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming from the stairs to my right. I cried out in surprise and took off into the house, not even thinking about what I was doing. The thought barely crossed my mind that this was some kind of prank. It sounded like several pairs of footsteps thudding against the floor, coming after me. That or something with more than 2 feet. I leapt into the kitchen and jumped toward the open basement door. I didn't care what was ahead, only what was coming from behind. I slammed the door to the basement shut and turned the lock. The footsteps hit the floor next to the doorway. The basement was empty and dark. The floor was covered in empty chip bags and cans of beer and various energy drinks. I ducked behind a chair and I tried to steady my breathing. My phone continued buzzing, but I ignored it.
Hello?
I heard a voice coming from right outside the basement door.
It's me, Uncle Ted.
As previously mentioned, I'd never been very close to my uncle, but I could still recognize his voice. And the voice that was coming from beyond that basement door was not his. Granted, it almost was. It sounded like a seasoned voice actor giving an incredible impression of his voice. But it still wasn't him. The voice was too strained, too deep.
Oh, come on, nephew.
The voice said.
It was just a prank. You can come out of the basement.
Uncle Ted would never call me nephew. He'd always called me Mark. Get the hell away from me, I said weakly. I know, it was stupid. I read some of the comments on my uncle's post, and the general consensus seems to be that replying to the voice is a horrible idea. But I was blinded by anger and fear. Those two emotions can cause even the strongest of people to make questionable decisions.
Now,
It said.
That's no way to talk to your uncle now, is it?
You aren't him,
I cried.
Just come out.
It said.
Come on. Come on, come on. Come on. For me.
I didn't respond. Though at that point it wouldn't have done me much good to stay silent. It already knew that I was down here. And now it was after me. I pulled out my cell phone and I looked at the most recent text from the unknown number. You've made your bed. Now you must lie in it. I've searched the basement, but there's no trace of Uncle Ted. I can only assume that he was taken, or that he escaped. I hope the latter is true, I need help. I need advice. There isn't much food down here, and I'm not sure what to do. Does anyone know what's going on? Has this happened to anyone else? Please, I don't have much time. It just keeps knocking and knocking and knocking. Thank you all for the support and the advice. I truly needed it. Some of you were telling me that I should stay put, and that I can survive down here for about a month without food. I'm not quite sure I can though, because all I have to drink are a few drops of beer left behind in the bottom of the aluminium cans strewn across the floor by my uncle. I've also been trying to learn from Uncle Ted's mistakes by reading the comments on his post. A lot of people were saying that he should have silenced his cell phone, which I have done. I realised that I should not have replied to the voice, but there isn't much I can do about that now. I'm beginning to think I should leave, but at the same time I keep hearing footsteps outside, and I'm not sure it's safe. Anyways, I've also received some texts from the unknown number. There's only 2 of them, and they say, "You have made a grave mistake. Do not leave the basement. If you do, the consequences will be dire." And the next one reads, "Please remain silent, for your own good." I still don't know what happens when it gets you, but from what I've experienced, it takes your voice and it uses it to lure in more victims. I think it's time for me to do something. I need to get out of here. Alright, I just peeked outside the basement, under the door. The coast looks clear, but I don't know if I can trust my eyes anymore. The sounds have stopped, at least for now. I'm going to leave, see if I can grab some food. Okay, I just left the basement, literally for only a second, and some wild shit went down. At first nothing happened. My feet silently touched down on the cold tile floor. I turned my eyes to the counter and spotted several food items. A loaf of bread, bottled water, and a plastic container of cookies. I greedily snatched them up and took another step into the kitchen. The silence was unbearable. I was on edge. I wanted this to be over. I didn't think I could risk running for the door, and thank God I didn't try it. I swung open a cabinet door and grabbed a few cans of soup. I didn't like how still the air around me felt. I just wanted to get back in the basement. I took another couple of steps. Every sound I made seemed to resound through the quiet halls. My breathing felt too loud. Even the next to silent sounds made by my feet sticking to the tile sounded like an earthquake in the kitchen. I kept looking back over my shoulder and glancing about the house, but I never saw anything out of the ordinary. I was just thinking that I might be able to make a run for the car when the worst thing imaginable happened. my phone buzzed. I had it on vibrate, but in the almost deafening silence, it rang out like a gong. I froze. A shudder ran through my body. I began to turn around, heading back towards my safe haven, the basement. Another buzz. Shit. I whipped all the way around and started taking quick steps toward the basement, when suddenly, something dark grabbed my face and blocked my view. It took me a few moments to realize that it was a hand, or at least something like a hand. It turned me in a complete 180 to reveal a pair of nightmarish red eyes. Instinctively, I shut my eyes tight. I heard it breathing, disgusting, ragged breathing, like a hairball was caught in its throat. I wanted to scream, to call out, to do anything, but nothing came out. I was shaking uncontrollably now. I wasn't sure what the hell that thing was, but I was pretty damn sure it wasn't just gonna let me stand there. After what felt like hours, the breathing began to fade. It slowly, but surely grew more and more distant, until I could hardly hear it. I waited about a minute, and then I opened my eyes. It was gone. What the hell? I wasn't going to complain. I darted into the basement with the food still in my arms, and I slammed the door behind me, locking it and pushing a chair up under the door. To those of you wondering, there's a small landing after you open the basement door, and a chair is able to fit on it. I sat down in the dusty corner, right next to the window, facing the door. That way, if something looks in through the window, they hopefully won't be able to see me. I took a sip from the bottle of water and pulled out my cell phone. 2 new messages had been sent from the unknown number. They read, "Go back into the basement." And the second one, "Your life is in danger. Get into the basement now." I looked down at my phone, staring blankly at the texts. And then, I tried what several of you suggested. I called the number. The unknown texter picked up on the 3rd ring. I swallowed and realized that goosebumps had formed on my skin. Would this mysterious person have answers? "Hello?" I asked. My breathing grew shallow as I waited for a response. All I heard for several seconds was breathing, deep and scratch, like they hadn't drunk anything for the past several days. And then they replied. Their voice sounded deep and artificial, like a robot. I'm still fairly certain they were using a voice changer, or something like that. That's the only way to describe the voice I heard. They said,
"You shouldn't have come here."
I swallowed, and I waited for them to go on.
"You've signed your own death warrant by coming here. May God help you."
I tried to speak, tried to respond, but my mouth felt like it had been glued shut. before I was able to say anything. They hung up on me. It's been a few hours since then. There's a phone charger down here, and a bathroom, so I'm good for that. The reason I don't want to drink the water is because a pipe busted down there years ago and still hasn't been fixed. I got a sip of it earlier, and it tasted like dirt. But I suppose desperate times call for desperate measures. Thanks again for the advice. I need everything I can get. This is Mark Harrison, signing out. It's so lonely down here. I have nothing except for my phone and your comments to keep me company. Honestly, I've considered talking to the voice just so I can have a true conversation with a human being. But there's still no way in hell I'd do that. Again, thank you so much for the advice and support. And for the awards. I'm glad that there are people out there that are listening and helping me out during all this. So, a few things have happened since I last updated. Mainly, it started trying to watch me from under the door. I can see its eyes staring at me, red, with black pupils, scanning the room. However, now that I'm looking at them a little closer, I'm realizing something. They're blind. The thing's eyes are milky and covered in what almost looks like cobwebs. I'm getting the feeling that they can't see me. I'm starting to think that it needs to hear my voice and the sounds I make to prey upon me. I'm still not sure, and I don't really want to test that theory. But sooner or later, I'm gonna have no choice but to try and leave. I've been sitting just out of sight from both the window and the door. I'm jammed into an incredibly uncomfortable position. But at least I'm safe. Or at least I hope so. The other thing of importance that has happened since my last update is the power has gone out. My phone is only on half battery, so I'll need to conserve it the best I can. I've got it set on the lowest brightness setting, and I'm not using it for anything strenuous like gaming. But the battery still seems to be draining remarkably fast. It's dark under here too, and it hasn't stopped raining since my first post. But there's nothing I can do about that. I'll just have to sit here in this corner, with my knees squashed up against my face, until either salvation comes, or I have a plan to save my own skin. Buzz. Another text from the unknown number. I opened it, and it read, "There is something upstairs for you." What? I texted back. They didn't respond. I didn't want to have to venture outside the basement, but it was really my only option. I peeked in the direction of the door, and to my surprise, that thing wasn't there. No eyes were staring back at me. I glanced at the window. Nothing there. I set my phone down on the table as some of you have suggested that I leave it in the basement whenever I leave. And I slowly started up the stairs. The chair I'd used as a blockade made a slight creaking noise as I pulled it away from the door. I cringed, but I couldn't hear anything coming from the outside, so I kept going. Slowly, I undid the lock and cautiously opened the basement door. My breath was held, my eyes squinted as I waited for something to jump out at me. But nothing did. I was safe, at least for the time being. I crept through the kitchen as quietly as I could, being so careful not to make a sound. After a few minutes of slinking along on tiptoes, I walked out into the entryway. It was dark out, as usual, and everything around me appeared to be coated in a thin layer of dust. My breathing echoed through the halls, the only noise around to pierce the sound. I walked in the hall, to the right of the front door, and I saw that the doors to every room were open, except for the door at the end of the hall. I crept up to the first room and peeked inside. It was a guest room, void of anything except for a bed and rug. Nothing in there. The next room appeared to be a small storage room. Boxes of random crap were piled to the ceiling, and a few old keepsakes littered the floor. But nothing of any importance was in there. What did the text mean? What did I need from upstairs? I checked the third room. Another guest room. This one had a few more things in it, but nothing that I could possibly need. That only left one more room. The room with the door closed. I gritted my teeth and gripped the doorknob. Should I turn back? Why am I even here? I ignored every rational thought in my head and pushed open the wooden door. It creaked quite a bit louder than I would have wanted. Luckily, there didn't seem to be anything dangerous in the room. I stepped inside, stepping over a laundry basket full of dirty clothes. Looking at the posters and the messy state of the area, I deduced that this was Uncle Ted's room. I looked around. Aside from the stacks of random crap, there didn't appear to be anything in the room. And then I saw it. A human-sized lump under the blanket on the bed. I began to sweat, dreading what I would see under there. But I'd come this far. I had to see what it was. I took a big step and landed right next to what appeared to be the head of the lump. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I drew the blanket away. What I saw made me want to cry and throw up at the same time. Uncle Ted was a bloody mess. His chest looked like someone had shoved their hand inside it and ripped out his heart. His neck was broken. His arms and legs had been mutilated. His eyes had been gouged out. He was dead. Shit. I didn't care how much noise I made. My uncle was dead. Tears rolled down my cheeks. That thing had taken him. I walked out of the room and into the hall. I don't care how much noise I make anymore. That thing can come here and rip me to shreds too. It can tear my heart out and gouge out my eyes. But it had better know that I'm not going down without a fight. Sorry for the long wait. It's been a while since I've updated, I know. A lot has happened, but as you'll soon see, your advice saved my life. It started in the kitchen. I grabbed the biggest knife that I could and yelled. I just screamed for a solid minute. I wanted to bring that piece of shit right to me so I could gut it. At least I could try to gut it. I didn't know how strong the thing was, but I could still attempt to kill it. I've been reading your theories and suggestions, and everyone seems to think that it can't see, or at least can't see very well, and can only track you by the sounds you make. It makes sense. My screams pierced the air of silence that had previously dominated. I shouted and yelled until I was gasping for air, my voice hoarse and my throat begging for water. I quickly walked back down into the basement, grabbing my water bottle and taking a huge swig. I still clutched the knife, holding on as if my life depended on it, which, if the situation became dire enough, it very well might be. I set the bottle down on the dusty floor and made my way across the basement. I began slowly walking up the stairs. I was still on edge. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that I wasn't scared, I knew I was. The feeling of walking up those godforsaken stairs is one that would never lose its ability to put me on edge. I couldn't hear anything from upstairs. Not a footstep, not a breath, nothing. Silently, I drew in a deep breath and walked up the next couple of stairs. Out of habit, I had slammed the door shut when I went down. Now I was forced to open it again. I swallowed and reached towards the knob. I'm not afraid of that thing. I'm not afraid of that thing. Sweat beaded along my forehead. Goosebumps covered my skin. My breathing was too heavy, too loud. I began twisting the doorknob. I was not fueled on by courage or bravery, but rather hate. Hate was what drove me. That thing had murdered my uncle, and God knows how many others. He had trapped me in that hellish basement, driving me to almost insanity with its words. I hated it, and it had to die. Yet, a fear still resonated inside me, still festered in my bones. I could never shake that away. I wished I'd never come here. I wished I'd never found my uncle's Reddit post. I wished he'd never gone missing. All I wanted was to be back at my house, living my life, never knowing about these things beyond my comprehension. I pushed the door open The creak it emitted seemed to explode throughout the quiet house. I tensed. I stood there, in the basement doorway, for a few seconds, staring into the house. I clutched the knife, watching. Slowly, I lifted my foot and placed it on the tiled kitchen floor. The footstep echoed throughout the house. Nothing happened. I breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, two pulsing black hands grabbed my shoulders and threw me down the stairs. I didn't have time to react. I tumbled down the stairs, hitting my head, legs, and pretty much every last one of my body parts. My nose and mouth were bleeding when I finally crashed onto the hard wooden floor, and my knife had skidded across the ground, out of my reach. My body burned with pain. I looked up the stairs to see something with red eyes, shrouded in shadow, making its way down the basement stairs. I tried to stand up, but upon doing so, I realised that my ankle was broken. Searing pain flared up my leg. I fell back to the ground. I almost roared at the creature. But I remembered my Reddit posts. I remembered your comments. Maybe it preys on sound. Not a sound escaped my lips. Instead, I began to army crawl, quietly as I could, across the basement toward the knife. Then, I slid over a creaky floorboard. The sound it produced resonated through the basement. I couldn't see the creature, but I felt its moist, dark hand pick me up by the legs. I think it meant to throw me into the wall, but it missed. I felt the rush of cold air, followed by immense pain in my head. I had hit the bathtub. This time, I couldn't help it. I cried out. Everything in my line of sight was tinted red. I groped around, all whilst hearing the sounds of the creature advancing. A mix between footsteps and sliding. The sound is hard to describe. Suddenly, I remembered one of your comments. Please try to find a weapon mark. You mentioned the old pipes. Can you work one of those free? Of course, the pipes. I threw the sink door open as a shadow spread over me. The thing was in the doorway. I could sense its arms, or whatever they were, reaching toward me. I groped blindly for the pipe. I managed to grip one of them, wrapping my hand around it, just as I felt something grab my leg. It tugged, but I held on for dear life. The pipes are loose and weak, and with that creature pulling at me, the pipe soon broke loose. I swung around, broken off, dripping pipe in hand. The beast brought me down upon the hard wooden floor, denting it in the process. I held my tongue as it swung with its arms, ducking right as they neared my head. I took a step back and beheld the creature. It was dark. Not because the room was dark. The thing itself was just dark. Dark with evil, glistening red eyes. It was hungry, and its prey was playing hard to get. The rest is impossible to describe. It was too nightmarish, too large for life, too vile. It was evil. It was starving. My knees began to buckle. I was shaking, sweat pouring down my face and back. And then, a hole began to open in its face. I realized with horror that the hole was its mouth. Glistening rows of sharp teeth lined it. My hands were so sweaty that I began to lose my grip on the pipe. It was the feeling of the rusty pipe slipping that brought me back to reality. I lifted the metal tube, wondering what the hell I was going to do with it. The thing began to lean back, poising for attack. I brandished my weapon. This was it, the final showdown. It lunged at me, fast as lightning. I dove out of the way, throwing the pipe towards its mouth. It lodged in the thing's throat. I could hear the disgusting sounds of it choking. I looked back. It was on the ground, thrashing around. I walked up to it. I couldn't kill it, but I could immobilize it for a time. I reached down into its throat, grabbed the pipe, and shoved. It gurgled in rage, but I kept going. This is for Uncle Ted. I was upset. I hated this thing. It had done so much to me. It had to die. Die, bastard. It began to slow. It had almost reached a state of unconsciousness. This was it. Burn in hell, you son of a bitch. It fell to the ground. I pulled out the pipe. Black blood spilled out of its throat. It twitched a few times before stopping completely. I walked out of the basement and into the sunlight. I climbed straight into my car and took off down the road. I guess I can't give you guys a full resolution. I can't tell you that I worked everything out with the authorities, or even that I killed that creature. There's a lot of unknowns. So this is it. For now.